Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first town hall for ARC White Box Estimation Challenge. In this town hall, we have Jacob Hilton from Alignment Research Center, who will be sharing the motivation behind the problem statement, giving us a walkthrough of challenge details, price structure, and other relevant details. We will then open the floor for questions from participants and gather some feedback. So let's meet the panelists for today. We have Jacob Hilton from Alignment Research Center. Jacob is a researcher at Alignment Research Center. Before working on ARC's theoretical alignment research agenda, he was a researcher at OpenAI, where he worked on a variety of topics related to reinforcement learning, including reinforcement learning from human feedback, scaling laws, and mechanistic interpretability. He has background in pure mathematics and received his PhD from University of Leeds in 2016. We also have Paul Christiano joining us in this town hall. He's also a researcher at Alignment Research Center. He was previously a researcher at OpenAI, where he led efforts to scale up reinforcement learning from human feedback to deep neural networks to production LLMs. He received his PhD from UC Berkeley in 2017 for research on manipulation-resistant learning algorithms. Thank you so much for joining us for this town hall. Over to you, Jacob.
Great, thank you, Sneha. Let me share my screen. Let's see. Okay, everyone can see fine? Yeah, okay, thanks for dropping by. I'll try and spend, not more than 5 or 10 minutes just walking through things and try and leave more time for questions and so on. So just at a high level, what is the challenge about? So you're given the weights of a multi-layer perceptron, so just a sequence of linear layers interspersed with ReLU activations. And the job is to, given the weights of the network, to estimate the expected value of the output. And of course, the natural way you would do this is to run many inputs through the network. But you can potentially do better than this by doing some kind of mechanistic analysis of what the weights actually are. Given access to the weights, i.e. white box access rather than black box access. The challenge is really a test of how much better can you do by doing anything else that you like with the weights. And yeah, the scoring metric is mean squared error on average for random weights. So this network is focused on kind of randomly initialized networks as a kind of easy version of this problem. So yeah, what's the motivation? Obviously, the challenge is for random networks, but we ultimately would like to be able to do this kind of analysis for much more sophisticated networks and be able to answer questions like, if we have some big LLM that's taking actions in the world and we want to avoid some potentially rare bad outcomes, it might not be. We want to be able to estimate what's the probability that some bad thing will happen, and we might not be able to get a good estimate by just putting inputs into the model, because maybe the model kind of has some kind of situational awareness and understands what we're trying to do, and we're in an adversarial situation with the model, or perhaps it's just rare enough that we don't get good estimates just from sampling. So we'd like to be able to understand any structure that exists in the model weights and exploit that structure to kind of produce a better estimate. So that's the motivation. Yeah. So as I said, it's called the white box estimation challenge, basically because you're given access to the weights. So it's in this white box settings, and we might distinguish between more of a black box approach, which is mostly about running samples through the network, and more of a white box approach. And yeah, I think, as I say, I think the key question we're trying to kind of probe with this challenge is, can we find white box estimates that outperform black box estimates? Yeah, so this is the price structure. We have phase one ending end of July, I believe, so in a few weeks, with $50,000 in prizes, and then phase two ending later in the summer with twice the prize pool currently. But we haven't yet decided what we're doing for phase two yet, like the size of the network or anything like that. We'll kind of see how phase one unfolds. So we may increase the prizes, but for now, that's what the default is. So yeah, I thought I'd say a few words, since maybe this is an interesting sort of one of the areas where people might be interested in like what we're looking for. So we have this algorithmic contribution prize. So yeah, just to recap, the top three prizes are basically just based on mean squared error, as you know, as a function of as long as you're within the computational budget, with this formula we have, some kind of moderate discounting if you don't use your entire flop budget. But then there's this algorithmic contribution prize, which is a little bit more opaque what that's about. And basically, there we are, we're interested in, did we learn something interesting that advances our research agenda? And the way we're planning to judge this prize is basically we're going to go through the top few submissions, maybe the top 10 submissions or something, and maybe more if just to scout out, see what other people are doing, and look at basically, was there something in this contribution, in this submission that we think made a big improvement to the score using some kind of like mechanistic analysis. That doesn't necessarily mean that the entire submission was like a pure white box analysis, like cumulant propagation, like in our paper. Maybe it uses some sampling, but if there's some kind of interesting structural analysis of the weights going on, in the style of like cumulant propagation, perhaps, or maybe something quite different, then that's and if we think some kind of analysis like that has like made a really meaningful difference to the actual performance, and as a result the method is scoring well, then that's kind of like what we're looking for. And we're to be eligible for this algorithmic contribution prize, you need to submit a PDF as well. So you can't just submit your code if you want. But you can win the score prize just with code, but for the algorithmic contribution, you need to submit PDF, or like strongly recommended submit PDF, so that we can understand what you're doing. And then our attitude to LLM usage is that we certainly encourage people to use LLMs in whatever way improves their submission. We think that LLMs are increasingly useful as in assisting research. But the main thing we would ask is that people are transparent. So for instance, if you had an LLM do almost all the work, say, I don't know how much people are using LLMs, but and you just tell it, oh, please produce a write-up. We would like you to have a preface at the beginning of the document saying, we didn't write this, we have no idea what's going on, this is what the LLM told us. And we can have a look, and we can just be aware that of how you generated that PDF, and we can have an appropriate degree of skepticism given the LLMs, especially in a kind of like auto research harness where they're just trying lots of things and don't necessarily understand what's going on. The content of that is, we're going to treat that differently based on like if you say like, no, we wrote this ourselves. So basically just kind of like be transparent. Don't try and pass off like LLM written PDF as having been written yourself, because probably what will happen is just don't do that. And I think probably what would happen is we would probably be able to tell, and we would probably, I guess we probably just ended up treating it as an LLM submission if it looked like there were kind of like errors and so on. So I'll say a few words about what we've seen so far, which I think might be interesting. So and how we've varied things between the two phases. So we had the warm-up phase initially, which didn't have any prizes, and we increased the depth from 8 layers to 32 layers, moving into phase 1. And one of the reasons for that was that we published this paper where we laid out some cumulant propagation approaches and how to get those working. And they work pretty well up to depth 8 or so. And as you increase the depth, they scale poorly. And indeed, we've found so far that in the warm-up phase, the best submissions, the highest scoring submissions tended to use like this factorized cumulant propagation algorithm that we published. But so far in phase 1, we've mostly seen sometimes people use some kind of cumulant propagation, like an initial phase to get some statistics and things like that. But mostly most of the compute at least at a glance, it looks like it's being spent on basically some kind of like quasi-Monte Carlo method. So that's like running samples through the network, not necessarily sampled just uniformly from the input distribution, but some variant of that basically. And I think, yeah, like I say, a core research hypothesis of ours um, is that if you have access to the weights, you ought to be able to outperform this kind of black box, um, this kind of black box approach. And so we're definitely very interested to see if like anyone manages to do better for this like depth 32. And one observation we have is that um, the it may be possible to use the fact that as the depth increases, the kind of the effective rank of the covariance matrix decreases, and so it may be possible to kind of recover the deficit between the two classes of methods. So I don't know, some hints there. We will. I'll certainly try and make sure these go up on the website so other people who aren't at the town hall see these thoughts. But yeah, we'll see what happens. Yeah, that's all I had. So back to you, Sneha.
Thank you so much for that. So now we're opening the floor for question, and also you can just drop your question in the chat as well, and we will address them all. Okay, we have the first question from Maxim. Must the phase two designated final entry be one already submitted before the July 31st freeze, or can we submit new entries during phase two until September 19th? When exactly is the designation locked?
The designation will be locked after on the actual phase two deadline. So the team freeze deadline is mostly for when you can merge teams, etc. But you can continue submitting to phase two throughout the whole phase two timeline, and any of those submissions is something you can designate for the final evaluations. Well, I would actually really encourage everyone to use the opportunity that we have both Jacob and Paul here. And the questions do not necessarily have to be about the logistics of the competition per se. They could also be intention with which the competition started, or you could just kind of ask Jacob and Paul on how would they approach it if they were competing.
Do you want to field this second question, Manti?
Yes. So we will be making a few more releases to Flopscope, and whenever we believe that these are changes which are meaningful, which mostly meaningful changes to the cost model, and it warrants a revaluation, we will actually go ahead and reevaluate the affected submissions. But the goal would be the final results we publish on which the final decisions are made, mostly from the private evaluation about the rounds. They will happen on the exact same version of Flopscope, and there we will give all the details on how they're reproducible.
Keenan's question?
Jacob or Paul, do you guys want to take it? Or I can give it a stab as well. Yeah.
So the question was, the existence of a prize means it's self-sabotaging for me to publish the details of my algorithms, since others could then imitate them. With that in mind, is there a suggested way for people to collaborate and benefit from each other's ideas? Yeah, it's a good question. We should probably figure out something better here. People can obviously, intentionally join teams. I suppose after the phase one deadline, I believe the winners will be. I think the winners code will be public. Is that right, Mahanti? Or after phase one?
No, actually. So
No? Okay.
there again, I have to kind of go revisit the exact rules, but there were two aspects to it, right? Anything that is submitted for the community contribution prizes, they will be released. Then to be eligible for the prizes, the winners have to kind of have the potential to kind of submit a technical write-up or etc. And there we have a small window, right? I'll have to just double check that, but I can do that while we discuss this.
And do they have to publish code, or are we allowed to release code from phase one?
Is it a question for me?
Yeah.
No, we are not actually. So the default is not, we will not be releasing the phase one submissions at the end of the phase one or even at the end of phase two. The idea was, again, any submissions that happen to the competition, well, it is code written and written by participants and belongs to them. Anything that we will kind of release will either be as conditional on the prize exchange or after we take express permission from them.
Okay, so at least once we give out the prize, we can. Yeah. So there we go. There's one answer is that in order to get the prize money, you have to release your code. So yeah, we also have these community contribution prizes. So kind of like discretionary small extra prizes if people kind of submit content or try and foster collaboration and community engagement and so on. So there was a question from Abinai: is there a reason why only final layer MSC is used for leaderboard instead of all layers? So the final scoring metric is based on the final layer MSE. I guess that's sort of basically because it lets us sort of specifically say, this is how you estimate the output of an MLP of this particular depth. Whereas if we did every layer, it would be combining many problems at once. Like, how do you estimate each of the individual depths? It wouldn't have been crazy to do that, but that's what we went for. Yeah, I think it's maybe a bit confusingly displayed. I think the interface maybe has a bit of information about the intermediate layers. I think that's there mostly just to help you kind of like diagnose any issues. Like, you can see how things are varying with depth. But yeah, we don't actually. That's not actually like part of the competition. The competition is about the final layer MSE, and the rest of the layers are just there for debugging and so on. Maxim asks, could the grade reports and leaderboard show more digits or expose the compute multiplier C over B directly? Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Yeah, maybe Mahanti can figure that out.
Yes, we do have. We will be kind of making some changes to the submission details dashboard, and we will definitely include this in the list of items that we'll be rolling out. And Keenan has a good point, right? So there is a small element of non-determinism because of the residual workload time. But as we see across many of the top submissions, that number, again, people have, and the agents have managed to really optimize it. And we will try to kind of reduce that non-determinism when we are doing the final evaluations before any of the prizes are given out.
So Maxim asks, Keenan published 2 datasets of MLP moments. Are estimators trained offline on external MC data within the rules? Does offline training compute count towards anything? They are within the rules. Yes, you can do that. I think probably that's less algorithmically interesting. So maybe if you're deciding whether to focus on tuning some black box approach, some opaque approach, where you've like trained a neural network on some set of features versus explore some maybe more theoretical ideas. I'd say the latter, if it works, is like more likely to result in an algorithmic contribution prize. But either approach is permitted, and whichever one gets the best MSC is obviously what counts towards the score. Yeah, and to be explicit, there's no way for us to track the amount of compute you spent like offline or anything. So that definitely doesn't count towards anything. So Maxim asks, on the private rerun, is the designated entry regraded once on fresh networks, or does any public split score carry over?
I can jump in.
I believe the final evaluation is just on a completely fresh set of MLPs. Yeah.
And also, again, we will be releasing the exact details on how the private reruns were done, but the exact number of MLPs we evaluate them, etc. Those are details we will basically decide after we have the actual top submissions which are in consideration and after actually analyzing them much more closely.
I obviously don't have any questions for ourselves, but it's good to see everyone. Really appreciated seeing all the submissions coming in so far. Cool to see people taking a swing at the problem. And I'm really excited to at least have very strong baselines where no one can ever doubt that we've put in a good effort at getting the best performance on this that we can. But I also think we're going to learn some things already. So just wanted to chime in.
I guess I have a question for the audience, which is I'm interested in how people are using LLMs so far. We get some sense of this because we can see the code people are submitting, but it's not always that easy to tell if a submission is like just kind of has a few bits of magic dust sprinkled on top, or if it's really a kind of like auto harness type thing where they've I'm kind of curious people's comments. Obviously, as one of the questions suggested, people are maybe not incentivized to share a huge amount, but maybe this is like a vague enough topic that people are happy to share.
Yeah, I'm definitely vibe researching everything. I'm having Claude Fable write code for me now and Claude Opus. But I tend to like have a semi-concrete idea and then tell it to implement that and then iterate that way, not just say like solve the problem.
You'll also receive an email, but if you just want to get notified the moment the video goes live, you can scan the QR code and subscribe. And you can keep sharing more questions and queries on the Discourse forum. And yeah, that's it from my end. From Abhinay, are the public and private MLP sampled from the same distribution?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So if you don't have any more questions, I'll be bringing this town hall to a close. Thank you so much for joining on a Monday. Thanks a lot to Jacob and Paul for making time out of their schedule to answer all the questions from participants. And I'll see you on the forums. Bye.